Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ask an Expert. We have Farrier Steve Kraus with us today, and this is a highly anticipated guest. I told Steve beforehand that I received more questions ahead of time for this Ask an Expert than any Ask an Expert that we've hosted. And I believe we're on episode, I'll say it in the intro, so you already know, but 115 maybe. So that's saying a lot. And for good reason too, because we have such an expert with us tonight. And shoeing is kind of, it has so many intricacies that it really takes an expert to answer a lot of these questions the way that they deserve to be answered. So I'm quickly going to run through some of Steve's resume. It would take us the whole hour if I ran through the whole thing, but I'll hit some highlights. Steve has been the head farrier at Cornell University College of Veterinary Medicine since 2010. He has expertise in shoeing horses across various disciplines from dressage to polo, and he's a polo rider himself. He was the first farrier consultant for the Mustard Horse Nail Company, and he even redesigned their U.S. nail line. He was inducted into the International Farriers Hall of Fame in 2016, and he has a new book out called Shoeing the Modern Horse. So, Steve, with that, sorry to be so long-winded, but it's such a pleasure to have you here with us tonight. Thank you for doing this.
Well, thanks for asking me, and it's a pleasure to be here and meet new people and, reach out and help them any way I can.
You were so kind when we reached out. Kinsey and I sometimes, we send emails and it feels like a bit of a long shot, but we were so happy to get your response, and you've just been really generous with being willing to be part of this. Maybe we could start with how you got into shoeing. Take us back to the beginning and kind of tell us the story of becoming a farrier and what your life as a farrier looks like today.
So it really started, probably started watching, cowboy shows on TV way back when, you had the Lone Ranger and black and white TV. And I grew up actually in the South Bronx, which a lot of people don't know. And but we had a summer home out on Long Island, and when I was 5 years old, they had a stable in town, and then my father would come out on weekends, and I said, "Hey, I'd like to ride a pony." It was like, believe it or not, riding a pony for 25 cents. Somebody led you around, and it didn't take long before I wanted to. Don't lead me. I'm gonna ride myself. And then my father, who rode some when he was younger, that was when you could rent a horse by the hour, go out by yourself without a helmet and go out on the trail. And my father started teaching me to ride when I was 6 years old. And that was something we would do on the weekends. But by the time I got to 10, all my friends were going off to summer camps, and I wanted to go someplace that had horses. And we actually found a place in northwestern Pennsylvania below Binghamton. And it was a life-changing experience because you got your own horse for the summer. When you were old enough, you could be competitive to get into this special group. And that was the first goal in life, to get my own horse for the summer. And when I was old enough and got in that group, of course, they were shoeing the horses there, and I was fascinated. So there I am at like 13, 14 years old. They had a guy coming in, and I just couldn't keep away from it. And the owner's son, who was a little bit older than me, was being taught to take over the program, and he wanted to get involved with the shoeing. So I was right there doing it and trying to get involved and getting hurt and cut and fumbling. But each summer we did a little bit more and a little bit more. And by the time I was in high school, I was asked to stay on the riding staff and help. And I wound up doing most of the shoeing. And when I went to college at Cornell, there was horses around the area that needed somebody. So I put up my shingle and went out and started shoeing horses. But the big thing at Cornell was the farrier shop that I now teach in was there. And I could pick Harold Mowers' brain, who was the resident farrier back then. And that's where the learning really began, because I would stop in and, "Here's Harold, I have a problem. And how can I do this?" And I would watch, fascinated, how he was teaching his students. And because he was a wizard at shoeing standardbreds, which are actually some of the hardest horses to shoe right, he would like impart a lot of his knowledge on me because the students would come and go, but I kept on coming. And he had all these friends in the area that, you know, hey, Harold, who can shoe my horse right? So Harold would send me out there, tell me what to do, give me the guidance, and I would go out and actually do it. And so it was a really great friendship, a really great opportunity, you know, because of Cornell and being there. And right about that same time, Doug Butler, who's nationally recognized farrier, has a great textbook out there for a long time called The Principles of Horseshoeing. Doug, a great horseshoer, was raised in this area also. His mother had a Welsh pony farm here, you know, world-class Welsh ponies. And Doug came back to Cornell to get his PhD in the vet school. And so he would come out shoeing with me. And again, one of the, you know, world-class farriers that was, you know, in my back pocket, you know, type of thing. And when the Mustad Horse Nail Company was looking for a American, you know, farrier consultant, they came to Doug Butler, and Doug was pretty much finishing his PhD, launching his first hardcover book. And, but he said, I have a guy that could help you. So I got involved with Mustad, helping them develop their clinician program and their products for this country. Now they're the largest purveyor of all things for farriers in the world. And so my association with Mustad, along with Cornell, is what, you know, put me where I am today. So, you know, I didn't do this by myself.
It is such a cool story. And you mentioned, when we talked earlier, you mentioned that at one point you thought maybe you would become a veterinarian. And through your work as a farrier and conversations with some friends, it sounds like you realized that, I mean, there's so much to be done as a farrier in terms of helping people have a horse that's performing and also feeling comfortable.
Yeah, there's that element that, you know, there is farriers who are veterinarians or veterinarians who become farriers. I've actually had several veterinarians take my course after they became vets. I've had a couple take it before they became vets. And either way, they're doing that podiatry type work where they have the, you know, the medical knowledge, and now they have the hand-on knowledge of the shoeing. And so it's a 1 + 1 = 3 situation, which is going to be very helpful to the horse. Everything is in one package. So the skills that I can teach veterinarians, that if they want to get involved rather than write prescriptions, actually, you know, follow through with their prescriptions, then that's very helpful. Everything's in one package. And that is a growing field with, you know, podiatry, as they're calling it now, veterinarians who could, you know, either in clinics, an in-house farrier like we have at Cornell, or a veterinarian that could do it all, take the radiographs, prescribe the medication, you know, everything in one package. So I have it easy at Cornell because I have all these great, you know, world-class surgeons and clinicians there. They say I'm at their fingertips, but no, they're at my fingertips. So I take advantage of them.
I would say you're all in good company, and together there's a lot of knowledge there, I'm sure, on the different topics that kind of make up the whole equestrian industry,
Right.
and equestrian health and well-being. So when did Shoeing the Modern Horse, when did that come out, and what inspired you to write that book?
Well, Katie Navarra Bradley is my co-author, and she was approached or has some workings with Trafalgar Books, and they talked about having a shoeing book. And I had helped Katie with a few other articles. I published quite a few articles over the years for mostly the American Farrier Journal, but some of the other horse publications. So she approached me with the idea, and I never thought I would write a book, actually. But it's sort of like the more we talked about it, the more it made sense. And there were all these topics, and we wanted to make sure this was a book more aimed at the horse owner, but also for beginning farriers. There's all kinds of information, some of it from my lectures that I do, some of it from the articles and clinics that I've done. And the idea of the modern horse, and I talk about it at the beginning, if you look at the timeline of horses in this country, let's go from the Civil War forward. The horses were used tremendously to help win the Civil War. All the manufacturing for horseshoes, nails, and equipment was in the North. The South had none of that. And so the South was at a disadvantage. And because of government contracts, they really ramped up the production of horseshoes and everything associated with it, part of that war effort. And then when the war is over, you have the growth of the big cities, especially in the East Coast. Again, everything is horse transportation. Tens of thousands of horses are used in the city. And there's actually a book written called The Horse in the City that was very interesting for me to read, just supplementing all what we already knew about how the horses were used, the main driving force to bring goods into the city, bring things around the city. And you can imagine, just as an aside, the horse manure problem you might have had back then with tens of thousands of horses in the city. But also they had to be shod for the streets. And so now we're coming into the late 1800s, horseshoe production, tools. The cavalry was the greatest trainer of horseshoers, and then everything else was apprentice driven. Now you have World War II happening, and you have the horse being displaced by cars, trucks, tractors, and slowly the horse is fading, maybe used as agricultural animal. And the horses were used extensively in World War I and even World War II for moving equipment around. And that's what kept some of the horseshoe and nail companies alive, was government contracts, because only racing was really where people were going to bet money on horses. Only the wealthy owned horses. Cowboys, of course, had horses. And so all the good horseshoes, all the good technology disappears by the early to mid 1900s. And then you have World War II is over. You have the baby boomer generation. Is the first generation really that has widespread recreational and sport horses, that almost anybody can own a horse now and have fun with it. And all the technology, all the equipment, all the horseshoe companies are gone at this point when I started. And so a lot of the knowledge was gone also. And so we're actually rebuilding. So the modern horse, to me, is the post-World War II baby boomer generation horse that we're talking about, the recreational horse, the sporting horse. That's the main horse that's being shod now. So that's where we are. That's the modern horse.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And people who pick up your book, is it a tool to help them be a better consumer of farriery, or is it a tool to, you tell me, tell me why somebody should pick up the book?
Well, it can be a more knowledgeable horse owner to begin with and understand more about it. We talk about foals in there, what to know about. If you're going to raise a foal, you have this cute, nice little animal here. It's going to turn into a horse. And if you don't take care of it right, not only in handling and training, but you have a very quick timeline if you have any type of limb deviations or problems to deal with it. And a lot of people go, oh, he's cute and he's running around and nature will take care of himself. Well, where do you think all the crooked-legged horses come from? That are the foals that weren't taken care of orthopedically when you had the chance to do something. Now you need better farriery to take care of that base narrow hind end horse that's going to underperform, even though he's very well bred, for instance. So you need to have somebody that understands how to deal with that. So the book talks a little bit about conformation of foals, what can be done, what can't be done, mature conformation, what could be done, what can't be done. We talk about the question of can my horse go barefoot or need shoes? And there's a lot of misinformation about that. It's become almost cultish in some ways. But I say the biggest reason people might want to keep horses barefoot because of the lack of competent farriers in some cases. So competent farriery almost negates the need to be wanting a horse to be barefoot if you want a performance horse. So, those are some of the many topics. We also talk about different farrier certifications, and that people always have questions. Well, what is a certified farrier? And, there's no mandatory licensing or certification in this country, like Great Britain. So anybody could be a farrier. So you should know what these certifications actually mean.
Let's start there. So that I think everyone should get the book is what I just learned. But let's start there with farrier certifications. So if somebody's looking to change farriers or even just kind of like double check that the person they have is qualified, are there specific certifications that you think are important for people to have, or walk us through kind of the possibilities there?
The American Farriers Association it started this push because we thought the federal government was going to come in and really mess things up. Not that we didn't want any kind of regulation, but bureaucracy is really kind of something we were trying to avoid to make it cumbersome. And so that was started in the early 80s by our members back then that were, looking to the future. And so a certified farrier is a farrier who has passed some minimum requirements of knowledge, of hand-eye skills, of a shoeing test actually that's administered. And that's the longest certification process in this country, and it's only since the early 1980s. And so the first level is your certified farrier, and again, it's a minimum qualification of competency. Then the second level is a certified journeyman farrier, which it's sort of like we talk about owning the trade, being able to make shoes from scratch, even though you don't need to anymore. Lots of good horseshoes on the market, but there was a time when you did need to, and I still make quite a few special shoes. So having those skills helps you, what we call owning the trade. You know how to do this, even though you don't need to. And higher levels of knowledge of anatomy and diseases and higher skill sets needed on the performance part of it. But anybody who puts himself through this certification process is somebody who wants to learn more, somebody who is looking to find, standardize their work to some degree as far as meeting a good standard of qualification. It's usually a safe person who understands the anatomy, understands, how to fit a shoe properly, all those good things that are sometimes not done. And you got to understand, somebody may be certified, they need to practice that level also. Right now, there's no good way to take it away from somebody. So that's one of the, I think, weaknesses of the system. But also, there's another organization that kind of grew out of the American Farriers Association called now it's the International Association of Professional Farriers, and they do accreditation, and they have a slightly different process. And they start off with a knowledge exam, which is an open book test, but it's over 400 questions, and you have to get 100%. So you have to have read it completely. You can't just by reading the book and answering the questions, you learn by absorbing all that good information. But the second thing they've done is moved it on to, they have actually endorsements for specific types of disciplines like dressage and reining and so on. So if you blow into town and want somebody who knows the rules, for instance, of what is allowed for certain gaited horses, and somebody who's shown competency in understanding how to shoe these horses, somebody who has got that level of endorsement for that particular discipline, that's a different direction, but also through the International Association of Professional Farriers. And both organizations do a tremendous amount of continuing education. That's the big thing, continuing education. They're responsible for putting on clinics all over the country, have clinicians that go out to various events, different farrier organizations, horse owners organizations also, and really promoting some of the same stuff I do in the book. And it's just going out there and teaching the public, teaching the farriers. And again, anybody who attends these kinds of things, next week I'll be in Reno, Nevada at the American Farriers Association National Convention. And that's a once-a-year deal. They move it around the country. And I'll be speaking on angular limb deformities in foals.
That's really
So
cool. Yeah, the continuing education does seem to be so key. I mean, in a lot of careers, but especially a career like this. I'm assuming there's databases online to search farriers that are accredited
yes,
at either of
yes,
those
right.
organizations. Okay,
Both
that's a
those
great
organizations have websites and have their farriers listed.
that's a great start. So, um, I mentioned all the questions we got ahead of time, and I did my best to put them in different categories so I'm not entirely all over the board, starting more high level and kind of narrowing into more specific questions. Let's start by talking about dressings. One of our members named Jane, she said, "What are your advice on good dressings for different conditions? And are they effective or gimmicky?" I know we had another question that was asking similarly about dressings and whether those are worthwhile or not, and how to kind of decipher.
So there's two ways hoof dressings work, or two styles, or so to speak. One is something that absorbs into the hoof wall. The hoof wall is very, very dense, and it doesn't really, absorb things easily. But some of the I don't want to get into particular names, but I might have to make the point. But some of them have the right types of penetrating oils, and it should not be a mineral oil. It should be some type of a vegetable oil based or animal fat based is what penetrates the most. And the old timers used to put on bacon grease on the feet to keep them good. So, they absorb lanolin, animal fats. And there's been, Doug Butler did some experiments on what was absorbed the most in the horse's foot. And lanolin was one of the ones, like, that's a natural animal fat oil. And of course, the old timers used to take used motor oil and put it on horses' feet because it looked nice. But that's the worst thing you can put on a horse's foot, because it has, elements of gasoline and stuff in there, which actually dries the foot out. But it looks nice and shiny when you're done. Then there are other things that are out there that are coatings, that are semi-permeable membranes, like Tough Stuff was one that Mustad developed. And there's a few others out there similar that put an actual coating that's a semi-permeable membrane that regulates or keeps the right amounts of moisture and sheds the excessive water. So depending upon where the horse lives, in very dry climates, some of the oil type hoof dressings to get in there, and you can put them on the bottom of the foot too, to get absorbed into the sole, are probably better. And in wet climates, something that sheds the water, more excessive moisture, something that's more of a barrier coating is better. And what I like about the barrier type coatings, they'll trickle down into the nail holes or cracks or whatever, and kind of fill them with like a cellulose bonding material, and that helps. Again, you don't have the moisture loss and the penetration of moisture. So depending on where the horse is, the coatings should be varied to the moisture conditions, I think, mainly.
And do you just observe what the horse's feet are looking like to determine how often you're using the dressing, whether you're in dry or wet climates, or do you work it into like a daily routine?
I think most things, once a week is usually plenty on most of the stuff. I mean, it's almost wasteful to put it on every day.
Yes. And then we had a question about supplements for a very dry climate. I believe she said she was in New Mexico.
So anything that's got, well, zinc in it, but it has to be a bioavailable form of zinc. So zinc methionine that's bonded to an amino acid is as better than what you might think of, like zinc oxide, for instance, which is, it's not bioavailable. So that's what you have to make sure of, all these nutrients. And you can go online and look at these different, what's good for horses' feet, zinc and copper and so on, but they have to be readily absorbed. And if a horse has absorption problems, as some of them do, then you might need to find something that's slightly different. Life Data Labs, and not making a special plug for them, but I have worked with them. Life Data Labs makes Farrier's formula, and their approach is making their supplements bioavailable. And for certain problems, especially like canker and some other, really bad hoof diseases, they will actually send out a blood kit where you can, have your veterinarian draw blood and send it in back to them. And they will analyze the blood and see what your horse is not lacking because he's not absorbing. He has problems with the digestive system. And then they will make up a trial formula to send back to you. And if that works, then you'll have to start buying it from them, of course. But so they've been pretty good at some of these clients that I've sent them that have these hoof diseases or hoof problems on, giving that horse what the horse really needs. They just can't get out of normal supplements or feed. Most good quality feed rations and have the right stuff in them. But, obviously if you have specific problems, then you should find out why this horse is not developing good feet.
Right. That sounds like a gift for people who are having issues to be able to send in blood like that and get a special formula. And you mentioned you're not plugging them, but you are invited to plug anybody or any brand that you'd like. So don't hold back there if anything comes to mind. But I think that was really helpful. The next question we have is probably the most general. She's asking, what are your recommended regular practices for everyday hoof care? And I guess I'll throw in, is there anything that you see as common that you think should be not a regular practice, but is kind of like trendy?
I think it's just knowing what normal is for your horse is real important. Taking a look at, what the horse looks like right after trimming and shoeing if he's being shod, and have a good understanding of that. Even if you take pictures so that you can refer to them, everybody can take a picture now very easily. And not only of the feet, but the horse's stance. Some of these horses' postural stance is not correct because their feet aren't underneath them, things like that. So as they grow out, some horses grow a lot of toe and break down the heels. And so just being observant of what's normal for the horse, what's a good normal stance for the horse, and so on. And picking up the feet, just clearing out debris, looking at the frog, know what a healthy frog looks like, what a not healthy frog is. And then you can always, again, people tend to overuse the products. Hey, if you have a thrush type product like Thrush Buster or any of these other purple products to put on their feet, you don't have to overdo it. Once a week, some of the purple dyes that are in there are meant to dye the active ingredient into the tissue. So if it's still purple, then the active ingredient is still there. You don't have to put more on every day. But it brings me to like understanding, knowing what thrush is versus other problems that are not thrush. Thrush is mainly occurs, it's a decaying process of the frog. So what does a healthy frog look like? What does a diseased frog look like? Some horses don't grow a healthy frog because they conformationally, maybe the way they're trimmed, maybe the way they're shod, they're not heel loading properly. So the frog needs stimulation. So some of the things we do with shoeing is provide that stimulation with some of the inserts, the pads, the dental impression material, so that the frog actually has stimulation to become more healthy if it's drawn up and atrophied. So knowing, just like I tell my students, you got to know the range of normal to recognize abnormal. So what's normal for your horse? What's a healthy foot? What's not a healthy foot? Those are, I think, important things to learn and get in your head. And you can go online and see nice pictures of bottoms of horses' feet. And a frog should be basically a weight sharing structure of the foot. And if it's not, then why is it not?
Interesting.
And so, again, cleaning out debris without being too aggressive. Every now and then somebody gets their hoof pick out and just slams it in there. And next thing you know, there's blood pouring out the bottom of the horse's foot because the tissue is somewhat diseased and is not protective as it could be. And they just went in there too vigorously. And now they went through a thin sole, or there's already some decay and it's atrophied the frog. and now there's not a lot of protective tissue, and now they plunged a hoof pick in there, and now they're going, oh my God, my horse is lame. And so you can overdo things.
Definitely. Those are great suggestions, especially be observant, monitor, take advantage of the fact that we all have a camera in our pocket. and looking at pictures of what a healthy frog looks like is a great suggestion too. And something I didn't know about, you taught me, if there's still that dye on their foot, the active ingredient is still there. That's a good tip. The next and last of this category is, what are some problems that you see in horses that you would steer away from when it comes to a purchase? Like we were talking before we went live about how you can kind of foresee issues that are going to happen if you know the type of work the horse is going to be in. Are there any common examples of things that are just hard for, let's talk about horses that are doing a discipline like dressage or eventing?
Right. So especially conformation is the big one here. And any performance horse has to have as few conformation abnormalities or flaws as possible. And I would rather have a horse with a really good hind end and a not so good front end than the other way around. And so when I'm looking at horses for myself, I'm looking at the hind end before I ever really care much about the front end. But normally people look at the front end first. They look at the head, they look at the ears, they look at the color. That's all important, how the head and neck is on. It should be balanced and all that. But the reason why the hind end is neglected, and it's neglected a lot in the literature too, is because everybody looks at the horse from the front. They want to see a nice square standing horse, but to really observe the hind end properly, especially when you don't look at this a lot, you really need to either have the tail tied up out of the way, or you need to go behind a strange horse and grab his tail, and you might get kicked. So that's a danger zone, so to speak. But the tail is sometimes hiding what you need to see because it obscures your eye. So I think of plumb lines when I'm looking at horses: side view, rear view, and so on. And for a dressage, a venting horse, jumping horse, polo horse, any horse that really has to use its hind end well, the hind end has to be correct. It doesn't matter how good the front end is if the hind end is incorrect. And so what we want is a horse that stands. If you're looking from the rear view, the tail is hiding things. So every picture in my book, the tail is either tied up or pulled out of the way. And from the rear view, we want to see a plumb line with a natural stance, which is sometimes also hard to get the horse to stand in his neutral, natural stance. Is if you drop a plumb line down from his outside of his hips, it should come right to the outside of his foot, or very close, one way or the other. If the horse is wider than that plumb line, then that's usually what we call a cow-hocked horse, a base wide horse who probably will use his hind end pretty well, but will get arthritis because of the hock position. Whereas if the horse is well inside that's the base narrow horse, what I call the upside down triangle, which is sometimes, again, hard to see unless you know how to look. And now this horse is inside his plumb line, and he won't load his hind end as well. So how does he engage his hind end if he's falling sideways? So the demonstration I usually do is I stand base narrow and I pick up my right front foot, and you watch my left shoulder fall sideways. And then I say, okay, look at me, I'm a horse's rear end. And then I put my heels in, which are the same as the horse's hocks, and I turn my toes outward, and I bring my stance so the outside of my foot is under my shoulders. Now I can pick up and I'm not falling sideways. So it's the same for the horse. If you ride a horse that is base narrow, you feel the hip falling right and left with every step. Do I want to ride that horse all day? Do I want to go on a 20-mile trail ride on that horse? Because you're sloshing like you're in a washing machine. So that horse will never come from behind well, even with expert shoeing, as well as a horse that's built like properly in the first place. So that's like the number one horse to steer away from if you are looking for that type of horse. And I know everybody's going to go rush out now and look at their horses and go, oh my God, oh my God. So there are things we can do shoeing wise. Some of it's in the trim. Quite often these horses, basically, if you were walking down, if you're on the roof of your house and walking down the ridge line with one foot on either side of the ridge line, that's how these horses are walking. Each foot is dropped to the outside. So trimming wise, we trim what we can off the medial side, okay, and take some of that medial flare off, and then use a shoe we call a lateral support shoe. That branch of the outside shoe is a little bit wider than the foot itself, to kind of balance things, to put some metal where the foot isn't and needs to be.
Interesting.
And there's only so much you can do before you're creating leverage. So the more extreme the horse is base narrow, the less that's going to help. It will help them some, but we can't put it way out there to find that plumb line if it's missing by an inch.
Yeah. Wow. That is really interesting how you can kind of adjust a bit within reason to compensate for something like that. The next.
Let me finish here. The difference here is when I do that for people, they will tell me, I cannot believe the difference in my horse, especially when I've been set up well, when it hasn't been done right, or the horse is barefoot and he's flaring to the inside and crushing the outside heel, and I can trim all that excessive flare off and put a lateral support shoe on. They tell me it's like I got a brand new horse.
Wow. I bet the horse feels like
that's how much it means to the horse.
Wow.
And I hear this over and over. And
that's really
and this is not rocket science.
Mm-hmm. It is the importance of a great farrier. The next question we have is actually a specific case, if you're up for it. One of our members sent photos, and I just thought it's like nothing like I've ever seen. So I'll share the photos she sent, and then I'll give you some context. Just wait one moment. You're not seeing anything yet, are you? Yeah, no. Oh, here we go. There they are. Okay. Mm-hmm. She said, last fall, my mare got an abscess in her coronet that burst. This resulted in her hoof cracking down the middle. Her foot was very flat, and it's getting a better shape, but it's still not growing together. Currently, we have it screwed together, and it seems to be doing okay. Just curious if you have any advice on how to treat something like this, and any advice that might help it start to grow together. And so these photos are 3 different time periods, going from the beginning to the most recent, which were the ones on the bottom are 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And for anybody who's just listening, it might be worth pulling up the video. This horse has a significant crack all the way from the coronet band all the way to the bottom of her foot. And she's got, like was described, it's literally screwed together in the middle, trying to hold that crack together.
So from what I can see is the thing that would be helpful for the farrier is I'm pretty sure if you took what we call a 65-degree dorsal palmar radiograph, which is, the beam comes down right from the front of the foot down into to view the coffin bone, you would probably see a big notch in the coffin bone. So the hoof is not joined well around that notch. We see a lot of these permanent. Anytime we see a permanent hoof crack on a horse, there's usually a notch in the coffin bone right behind that. So that's probably, that would support that. And the other thing that can be done, they did a nice job of putting that plate and screwing that, helping it grow together. There's nothing viewing on the bottom of the foot, but putting a frog support type horseshoe on there, if they haven't done that, that would be the main thing that would be helpful. What we call a heart bar shoe, a rigid frog support. It looks like they've got toe clips either side trying to hold it together. But a heart bar shoe combined with all that, rigid frog support would also help keeping that foot, and the coffin bone is not stable. So that would add stability.
So if the radiograph shows that notch you're talking about, is there hope that this crack will grow together, even like with the correct shoeing, or is it something that will continue to look like?
It'll probably be continue, but lessen.
Okay.
It's just a matter of, staying proactive on it, keeping this horse will probably need to have a heart bar shoe for the rest of its life. And just good. It should never be barefoot, and just stabilize the crack like they're doing. But I say, I don't know if they has a frog support or not, but that would be the number one thing in my mind to get going, aside from what they've done.
Okay.
Because the bony column is trying to descend, and the foot is actually, in some cases, it's not doing this, it's doing this.
Mm-hmm.
See, so that's what's happening.
I think that I know that she'll really appreciate getting that opinion. When you have something like that, it's just, it's just not what anybody wants to have their horse go through or go through themselves. So I spoke to her, and it's just been it's an injury that's a bit of a long road.
Yes, it is.
Thank you for being willing to look at that. It's one of the questions I wanted to make sure that we got to, because it's been a lot for her to go through, her and her horse. Okay. Another question that we got, Amy is asking for your tips on recognizing an ideal hoof, and how can a person assess if their farrier is doing a good job or whether they should find a second opinion?
Well, there's always that range of normal, and it's going to vary from breed to breed type of thing. But the ideal hoof to me is a fairly symmetrical foot. A normal stance on, let's say, a front foot, it's not a perfect like round. It has a little slightly straighter sides, and it should be a little fuller to the lateral toe, not a lot. We don't, some of the people are still hung up on what the ideal halter horse is for a quarter horse. And that is usually not a performance horse. It's a statue, so to speak. So there's a slight fullness to the outside. If you were to divide a hoof, the area of a hoof right in half, we would want 52% on the outside of the midline and the other balance on the inside. Not very much, just enough front and hind. And we want the bottom of the foot, the perimeter of the foot should match, not the same size, but the same curve as the coronary band. So one of the things I teach is my students are trimming feet and bringing the foot forward and doing a little finishing, is look at the coronary band. Does the bottom of the foot match the coronary band? And if it doesn't, then why doesn't it? What's distorted here? So that shape is very important to match the coronary band. And if a foot doesn't, then something's not right, or something needs to be done. Obviously, if a piece is missing, broke off, you would fit the shoe where that foot should be. You don't follow that. We're not shoeing the coast of Maine type of thing. So that's important, that the bottom, the perimeter matches the coronary band. And then if we look at the heels of the foot, we look at the bulbs of the heels and pick it up as we're, holding it to balance it. We want to see a square foot to the cannon bone, not the fatlock joint. We want it to hang and hold the cannon bone. We're assessing this because we can push the foot anywhere we want. But we also want to see equal heel heights from the hairline at the bulbs of the heel. We don't want to see one pushed up, and with some horses we see that pushed up inside heel or crushed lateral heel or something like that. So those are things that we want to look for on just general, the shape, function follows form. And so that we want the even weight bearing. When I watch horses walk, and new horses, especially if they're lame, I'm looking at the footfall, and I want a fairly level landing, that a fairly heel first landing, not slamming the heel, but I want it to land and roll like a wheel forward on that foot. when I see a horse landing toe first, something isn't right. It could be the trim, it could be heel soreness. The horse should not land toe first. And so that's a biggie, and it's simple. I mean, you just have to learn to look at it. So things like that. I know it's getting a little bit away from what a horse's foot should be, but a pretty foot can still not land correctly if even though the geometry is looking good. So that's important. Front feet have a rounder shape to them for bearing the weight. The horse carries approximately 2/3 of his weight on front, and the hind feet are sort of triangular spade shape because that's the propulsion. So we want a toe to stick into the ground, especially on soft ground, to propel the horse forward. And if we get, some farriers get carried away with blunt toes and square toes and rounding the toes off too much, you're taking propulsion away from that horse if you alter the natural shape of the hind feet. So if we want propulsion, we have to let the horse have it and can't take it away from him. And I've shot all kinds of horses that were not, where they were stubbing off the hind toes and they were wondering why the horse can't move.
Right.
So
what's the reasoning for stubbing off why does that happen at all?
The biggest reason I think is when you lose shoes in front, they want to shorten the hind toes to stop, whatever is reaching forward and for stepping the shoes off. Now, there's all kinds of reasons horses lose shoes. That's a whole chapter in the book. And sometimes it's farrier error. Sometimes it's conformation of the horse. He's built to step on himself. And sometimes it's rider error because the rider has the horse on the forehand and not letting the front get out of the way. So there's all kinds of reasons. And so sometimes we have to shoe horses because people can't ride well or they have poor management of the horse in their fields or whatever. And we don't want to be, putting shoes on a lot. So there's a tendency, to just shorten those toes to stop the horse from grabbing front shoes off. Most shoes that are lost are front shoes. So we know it's a hind coming down and stepping that off. So that's a reason why horses do it, but it's at the cost of propulsion.
So it's not a solution that you would necessarily be in favor of for a horse that's pulling its shoes a lot.
No, I usually, why is this horse not getting his front end out of the way?
Got it.
And I can change the timing of the hind feet to keep them on the ground a little longer. I want to make sure that horse is loading his hind end. Again, if he's not loading his hind end, we're talking milliseconds different, especially as the horse moves at speed. But really, if the horse fully loads the hind end, the front end gets out of the way unless the rider interferes with it or the horse stumbles on something. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of, one of the concepts I teach, and getting back to hooves and what they're supposed to look like from the bottom, is if there's an anatomical feature on the bottom of a horse's foot, and you have to trim the foot to some degree or see through the excess frog, it's known as Duckett's dot. And if you Google Duckett's dot, Davy Duckett made us aware of this. He called it the dot, and then all the farriers now call it Duckett's dot. But that is a landmark that is right under the insertion of the deep flexor tendon at the bottom of the coffin bone, which is right below the insertion of the extensor tendon on the top of the coffin bone. And so that's a landmark. And roughly, once you have a trimmed foot, there should be 1/3 of the whole distance between that point to the toe and 2/3 behind it to where the heels are or the horseshoe ends. And that's what we call the golden ratio proportions. And that 2/3 distance is often the actual working toe length of most horses. So that's a geometric trim. It's a great starting place. And that's how we make sure this horse has the right medial, not medial lateral, but anterior, posterior, geometry to land the way he's supposed to, move the way he's supposed to. And when that is done correctly, it solves a lot of problems right there. Mm-hmm. And if a horse is either because of conformation, sometimes you cannot trim the conformation because of the conformation or the distortion of the foot, if you can trim it to those ratios, we can do things with shoe modification and position to help that. But often the horses with the worst problems have the actual golden ratio reversed.
Oh,
So there's over 50% or 2/3 of the distance in front of the apex of the frog area and 1/3 behind, because the horse has underrun heels that aren't supporting. And so if you can change that with your trim and shoe placement and shoe modification, you see immediate results. And I've had hundreds of stories where we've done that, and people call me up and say, again, I think I have a new horse.
when the golden ratio is backward like that, is it because of a period of time where the shoeing was kind of leading to that?
It could be either inability of the horse to grow a good foot that stays underneath him, or wasn't trimmed correctly, or a combination of, or he's got an excessively small coffin bone, which is, again, some of the Western horses I see have way too much hoof in front that cannot be trimmed, and not enough in the back half of the foot. So some of these horses, you really need to do more with the shoes and shoe placement to help that. And that's what we use shoe modifications for, like roll toes and so on, is to create the mechanics that we can't get from the horse. If I have too much toe in front, but I don't want to set a shoe back, and I don't want to take all that extra wall away, then I do a good roll on the toe, which moves that breakover point backwards by a good 1/2 of an inch or 5/8 of an inch, and I can still have the shoe under the foot well.
Right. Wow. All right. Our next question is from Keegan. Just so everybody listening knows, I'm kind of choosing the ones that are relate to a broader audience. So I know we have a lot of specific questions, but for the time being, I'm choosing ones that are more broad. Keegan asked us, what is your criteria for deciding the type of shoe or pad for a horse? And what are the differences between the various types, aluminum, steel, plastic, glue-on, etc.?
All right, this is going to take a couple of minutes.
Okay.
so basic horseshoe, is a flat piece of steel. And we think of horseshoes of the way they are sized and everything, width of the stock and thickness. And so a standard shoe would be, in the theoretical world, double the width of the actual trimmed hoof wall. So a normal horse has a 3/8 inch thick hoof wall approximately. So a shoe that's 3/4 of an inch would be a standard shoe. And thickness, you don't want anything too light, or too heavy. So again, a standard shoe is about 5/16 by 3/4 thick. And as we get into a heavier, wider shoe, we either want more support for a thicker wall, a bigger foot, or we want more sole protection, or we want more material underneath the horse for more protection of the sole and more flotation on whatever surface he's on. Whereas if we want a shoe that penetrates the surface, like soft ground, like a dressage arena, we don't want a lot of penetration in a dressage arena. It makes the horse sticky. We want the horse to be on top of the surface. Whereas if I'm galloping my polo horse on turf, I want those feet to penetrate the turf. So surface is a big decider on the type of what the ground surface is, whether it's a rim style shoe that penetrates into the ground versus a wider flat shoe that stays above the surface. So those are all considerations of these things. And for instance, if you are traveling from up north and are showing horses on non-synthetic horses, and then you go to Wellington and show in Wellington on a synthetic surface, you're going to need a different shoe that has less traction and more slide, because when they went to the synthetic surfaces on a lot of these venues, they reduced the concussive injuries, especially on jumping horses, but now they have soft tissue injuries if they're not shod right. So definitely surface has a lot to do with the type of shoe surface. And so As we go the other way, as we get into horses that are used more at speed, we want lighter shoes that don't cover the foot as much, that give the horse the ability to move a little bit better without the weight. And again, be handier, penetrate the ground. So as soon as we start, what do we need for, what is this horse doing? Where's he doing it? What's his conformation? Is he a heavy boned horse? We don't want light shoes on heavy boned horses. If you need the shoe lighter, then you go to aluminum. Now, aluminum is a third the weight of steel. So you can have the protection and support of a big steel shoe without the excessive weight. So horses' leg swings to weight. So if weight is a problem and movement, like in the hunter ring, then definitely go to aluminum shoe. But if you have a big boned horse, going to an aluminum shoe on a big bone, and you want him to move like, a light bone thoroughbred, it's probably not going to make that much difference. It'd be more in the trimming to make the horse move correctly than to put an aluminum shoe on, because the weight is not going to be as much big a factor. So, steel versus aluminum all depends more on, reducing swing weight on horses. Years ago, when there wasn't a lot of good aluminum shoes on the market and we fooled around with some of the basic ones, you take some spindly legged thoroughbred and put some aluminum on, and he wins a hunter class, and then everybody wants aluminum after that. But that helped that lighter boned horse move better without the big clunky shoes that we had available then, whereas the bigger, heavier horses, it didn't change them that much. So that's just like a weighing one against the other. And then some of the composites that are out there now are helpful for horses, more for shock absorption. If you're going to trail ride on lots of hard roads or something like that, that would be a good thing to have. So
I'm glad you mentioned that. We have an endurance rider. One of the questions that I haven't asked, but she was asking about composite shoes. So that's good to know that you think that's she's putting a ton of miles on her horse in Montana, Hannah and Dara. So it sounds like you would be in favor of a composite shoe for that sort of.
The problem with composite shoes is they're making better ones all the time. And on an abrasive ground, they may or may not last for tons of miles. I shot a horse, again, every horse is different. I shot a horse several years ago that went to the Tevis Cup. And there's a certain, shoe that I've been shoeing this horse with. It's an American made, what we call a forged shoe, has enough grip. I put a little roll in the toe, and that horse, I shot the horse 2 weeks before the Tevis Cup. The horse did 100 miles over the Tevis ground out there, which is abrasive. And then when I reset, the horse came back, the shoes were still reusable. So that horse did not wear those premium quality steel shoes out, but another horse might have. But this horse travels really well. He doesn't hardly, grind himself into the ground. So a lot of this depends upon the horse also. Some horses are hard on themselves and some horses are not.
Got it. Well, we're coming to the very end, but I have one final question that showed up in chat that I want to get to. So she's saying that she noticed her horse's frog blending in with the sole. Like there's no difference between them on one side of the frog. What can cause that? And is it an issue that a paranoid horse owner should panic about?
Don't panic. I would just say that it just didn't get trimmed out. There should be a definite, hopefully, usually the horses may be a little flat footed if they're doing that. So be careful trimming. But sometimes maybe the horse overuses that side. Might be a flatter foot on that side. A lot of horses, we'll have to talk some other time about what we call the high-low horse or the mismatched front feet. And my guess is that on this horse is a high-low horse, and the sole's very flat on that side. And so, that means there's less sole thickness, and the coffin bone is kind of mashing everything together there, my guess would be.
Got it. Well, don't panic was a great way to start that response because I know it's easy to spiral about anything. With that, my clock is telling me that I've taken you over an hour, which is no surprise, right? I mean, you have made me fascinated about horses' feet and shoeing, which I used to just hope that I could find, the best professional to just entirely trust. But your expertise is so admirable and makes me hungry to learn more. And I know it goes for the people who are listening and watching as well. So I really do hope we can have you on again. I apologize to people whose questions I didn't get to. But Steve, you just taught us so much in the past 60 minutes. So thank you for lending your expertise to us.
Oh, happy to do it. And I'm happy to come back again. That's, not a big deal for me.
That would be great. So everyone listening, there will be a part 2. We'll get to more questions. In the meantime, pick up Shoeing the Modern Horse. I'm sure that is a wealth of things to learn as well. And
that'll answer a lot of your questions.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that sounds like just a very empowering book for horse owners. So pick up a copy of that. Stay tuned for when part 2 with Steve will be, and have a wonderful night. And thank you again, Steve, for